All right, next up, guys, we are going to do a black burst Stratocaster. So that Strat maple burl veneer body I did the other day, we are now going to add Angelus black leather dye. You can purchase the dye in the link below. We're going on with straight black. I've got a cut up t-shirt, some gloves, and we're just going to apply this dye all over the body. This dye really soaked in. I was surprised at how much dye this guitar body took on. I've done a lot of bodies in the past, and usually the dye doesn't soak in as quickly, but you can see here I actually saturate the rag, dump it on, and then have to add more dye. Usually I don't do it that much for the tops I've worked with. So it's pretty interesting. This maple burl veneer has been bleached. You can purchase it from veneersupplies.com. And like I said, you can get the Angelus dye from the link below. This veneer is beautiful. You can see it straight out, right out of the box, nice and flat. Joe over there has some beautiful veneers. I've purchased a bunch of stuff from him. Really enjoy seeing what he's got. And he's got a clearance section that's got some really cool stuff. So these are one-piece veneers. I just glued them in the last video with some cold pressed glue and then routed and shaped out the body. I always put on 2 coats of dye. Helps get the color penetrated across the body. Gets out all even. If you only put 1 coat, the dye doesn't soak in evenly sometimes. So then after 24 hours, we're going to come back and start sanding out the dye a little bit. We want to do a black burst. And for some reason, I cannot get the dye out with just the hand sander. So this is a hand sander in 320 grit. And this veneer was in the clearance bin, and there's a couple lines running right through this. And so at first I thought I can use my palm sander and just get it out, and I can't. It was very frustrating. So I start with 320. I then grab a razor blade and see if I can get that out. And you can see the line here right next to that pencil mark. It runs right through in a couple of spots. I think that's why this was on clearance. So we're going to get a razor blade and we're going to try and scrape out the line. There's a line running through the body towards me, and then there's one running right where the sort of between the bridge and the edge of the body. So this isn't working, and I'm actually going to pull out the power sander. And normally I would say never power sand veneer, but this veneer is not sanding out. Maple burl is really, really tough. It's hard to sand. You don't see a lot of companies working with maple burl because it is sort of a huge pain to work with. I've been doing maple burl guitars for probably about 15 years. That's one of the first things I started. And getting that dye out and getting that sanding back effect to work is a little bit tough. I've burned through a lot of sandpaper. So I'm really pushing down here, trying to get that line out. And I'm careful to not sand too much. So that was my big fear. As I was sanding, I'm going to sand through the burl, and I've got a mess and I've got to start over. But as I'm pushing with the lighter grit, this is 320, it's not sanding through. So I just keep going and turn the sander on its edge just slightly. You really don't want to do that either, because it just gives you a spot to sand through. But as I was going back and forth, I could see it's not sanding through. I still have the line, and I've got to keep going back and forth. So I've got a real light grit. So this is 320. I would not go anything more aggressive. I think if I had went with a 120 or even a 220, I think that would have been way too aggressive and it would have sanded through. So we're just going to use the 320, and I'll burn through a couple of grits here, a couple of papers, but then I know that I'm not going to sand through, and I'm much more controlled using the power sander here. I'm going to come back with the open grit sandpaper that I got from Klingspor. This is 800 grit, and it allows sort of the suction and the vacuum to go through the paper, and it doesn't load. The 320 grit loads, and you have to clean the paper off. This actually does a pretty good job of bringing all the dust right through the paper. You don't get any loading. You can use these grits a little bit longer. So I'll go back and forth across the top here, and I'm still working at that scratch. Very frustrating. So we'll finish the top, flip it over, come back with the 320 grit, another new piece of paper, and go back and forth on this back piece as well. The back actually went a little bit better. Not so sure why the top was so hard. We'll flip on the open grit piece of sandpaper again, get it all cleaned up. I've got one scratch I'm looking at, and we'll try and get that out with the 320. A little bit of back and forth to get this right. Don't want to sand too much, don't want to sand too little. And that scratch in the front is causing me some pain. So we'll go back with 320. Hit it again with the open grain, the open piece of paper. And then I just take a little bit of black dye and wipe it on after I do this. I didn't film that. And I come back then with some sanding sealer, and this is some pre-catalyzed sanding sealer from Mohawk. This stuff comes in a can. It's real easy to apply. You need to use a sanding sealer with the Angelus dyes. You need to lock in that color. And so this sanding sealer helps lock in the color. You can use the sprayable shellac or some other stuff, but here I put on 3 light coats. So just spray it, let it sit, spray it, let it sit. Make sure I saturate the sides and the top good enough. And this is the 3rd coat going on, so it's a little bit thicker. Body's looking pretty good. So we're going to come back and do some airbrushing. Just like Kevin Bond's guitar, I've got this triple black custom black paint. You can get this stuff on Amazon. I didn't want to come back with the black and sort of wipe it in. I knew if I had done that and sanded back, I may have had a problem trying to get that color out. Here I was a little fearful that I've got too much sanding already done. So we're just going to go back and forth with the airbrush, spray the cutoff piece, and then feather the sides. And this is a Harbor Freight airbrush kit, so $80. Don't really have any heavy duty pro equipment here, just a simple airbrush with the custom shop paints. And I've got some airbrush cups that allow me to do a couple different colors relatively quickly. The technique here is going back and forth in a controlled motion slowly. So the airbrush doesn't spit out a whole ton of color really quickly. So you have to do a couple passes. So here I'm on the lower arm and the lower side of the body, and that back and forth motion is what darkens it all up. You need to do this a couple of times. I think I did about 3 coats. This is the first coat. Just a slow process, just back and forth. And this takes a little bit to get a hang of. It's not too hard. Speed this up here for you and show you how long it sort of takes to get on. Trick with these airbrush guns is to keep them clean. Disassemble them, give them a bath in lacquer thinner, paint thinner, and then keep them maintained. Same process for the back side as well. Flip the body over. Filming here with my GoPro. Very slow, deliberate motion. And I want to try and keep the feathering to about a 1/2 inch. So I start sort of 1/4 inch in, and then I'll pull my airbrush back and get it to feather a little bit more. So since this is the first pass on the back, I'm a little bit closer. As I do the second and third pass, I pull my hand back a little bit. That way you've got a real even application of the paint. We're going to then put a couple more coats of the pre-catalyzed sanding sealer, lock in these colors. We'll do this to the front and the back. I put 3 more coats of sanding sealer on. And then we're going to put some oil on this. We are using Wipe On Poly This is one of the clearest finishes you can use. We're going to put 2 coats on the front and the back, and then we'll be done. We're not going to put a whole ton of finish on this. The Wipe On Poly was rated against a bunch of different finishes. Very, very good finish. Easy to apply. You can do it with a rag. And I don't want a really high gloss on this. I want a satin look. This turned out really nice with the 2 coats. I'm going to do the next video. I'll assemble it. I'm waiting for my black pickguard to come in. I've got some Japanese Strat pickups for it. So thanks for watching, guys. We will see you in the next video.